Hello, my dear ESS students. So I'm sick today, so I'm gonna record this video instead of coming to class and infecting you. I might come tomorrow if everything is okay, we'll see. I think we stopped here on topic 5.2, looking at the greenhouse gas emissions from different foods and from different sources, and we basically noticed that higher up in the food chain, so getting food from animal products, cheese, beef especially, and chocolate, oh my god, coffee, releases a lot of greenhouse gases, partly from the land use change by the soil practices and deforestation, and the farm itself, methane from the cows, rice, fertilizers, manure, and farm machinery, the feed that you need, and the processing transport is not a huge amount. I mean, it becomes relatively bigger for some products, but mainly we have land use and farm that is perhaps the biggest difference here. We also should bring up some other parts as well. This is from a study from 2018, looking at the spread of, for example, how much water you need for specific to make either an amount of energy of some food or the amount of protein. And what we basically can see is that acidification, eutrophication, and water scarcity are much higher in certain types of food than others. So we can look at, for example, the share of land that is irrigated. That means that it's agricultural land. In this case, is both the crop land and the grazing land, and how much. And part of that is, of course, irrigated by just rainfall. But in other places, it's irrigated by artificial irrigation. And we see that varies across the world quite a bit. In India and Pakistan, apparently they irrigate quite a lot. And the intensive use of land for agriculture has led to soil degradation. We're going to cover this a bit more in chapter 5.3, but you see that in most of the world, the way we use land has led to soil degradation, to some degree at least. So the degradation of the soil means, of course, they become less productive. And on the other hand, we also have an increasing population. So it means that the available land we have for our food production is becoming more and more diminished. So we can compare, in the 1900s, everyone had about 7.9 hectares of land to produce food. Now it's about somewhere between 2 and 1.6. So this is gonna, of course, continue to be a problem. So the conclusion is that we need to increase global food production to account for the increasing population. However, so some estimates is that we need to increase it by 50 to 70% to 2050, depending on from when you count. Between 2011 and 2050, it's 7%. I guess it's 50% now, probably. So we need to be effective in how we use our land for food. And of the total surface of the Earth, about 29% is land. Out of those, the 71% is habitable land. Some are glaciers and barren land, so deserts and so on. And about of the 71%, about 50% is agriculture. 37% is forests and so on. And of the agricultural land, 77% of it is used for livestock in some way. 23% are crops. However, the global calorie supply comes to 82% from these 23% of the land, and the majority of the protein supply as well. So yeah, that's the reason why, the reason, of course, is the second law of thermodynamics. As we move energy along through the food chain, we lose energy. So higher up in the food chain, more land is required. So the question then is, how can we save land? And of course, the conclusion is that to eat lower down in the food chain. So you can make big changes by just removing beef and mutton, the ones that are the most, so to say, most land intensive. However, dairy adds quite a bit to this as well. So if you remove beef, mutton, and dairy, you get actually quite close to being more or less vegan. So if you include egg and fish, then you're and compared to a vegan, you're actually not a huge change off in cropland according to this study. But becoming vegetarian or pescatarian, as it's called, we would reduce then the amount of land we need for agriculture by 75%. So this is basically one of the simplest ways that we can increase the productivity of the land that we have left, reduce and feed the population, basically. We looked at this group here. These are the averages, but you can see that there are actually, of course, quite large spread in how much land you use to grow, for example, beef, depending on how on the type of farm. So there's a big spread here, and we can see that that's true for all kinds of products as well. Okay, so coming back to how land use has changed, so the amount of land that is available for agriculture only increased by about 8%, and most likely we don't want it to increase, because then of course we push the biodiversity crisis by reducing habitats and degrading habitats. So as I said before, need to increase food production in the arable areas we have, or the agricultural land we already have. And the last 2 points then is point 4 and 5. And point 4 was that food production is closely linked with culture, tradition, and politics. So how the type of food choices we make depend quite strongly on historical and social and economical factors. So we see, for example, that meat consumption is increasing in the US, but if we compare it to China, then of course it's increasing quite a lot. We can see that the amount of meat that people eat varies quite strongly across the globe. So it's and what we can see that is highly correlated to the GDP of the area, so of the land, so or of the country. Sorry. So economical factors are very important, and we consider meat to be a status symbol, and this led to these kind of per capita meat consumption increasing as global poverty decreases and economic development continues across the world. Especially poultry, apparently. I've seen some figures looking at the amount of or the number of individuals. Of course, poultry have smaller animals with less meat on them, so it's like quite crazy exponential curve looking at how many chickens are produced every year. So the modern way of eating is of course using perhaps more animal-based products, and we move towards processed foods as being kind of a status symbol, people following the Western countries. And it's quite interesting as well to look at Macho Culture as a part factor here as well. And they bring this up in the series Netflix, in the movie Game Changers on Netflix. It's quite interesting, where people like Arnold Schwarzenegger, an ultimate macho dude, has been promoting meat eating for basically most of his life, where now they're not. And of course, eating red meat is seen as very manly, but at the same time, eating a bunch of red meat and processed meats is connected to higher risk of colorectal cancer and cardiovascular disease. So that's why this little article is interesting. So there are a number of ways that we can increase then the sustainability of our food production systems. So one of them, of course, is to change then the attitudes. For example, then the topic that I've been hammering home, eating less meat, buying local, seasonal, or perhaps even organic food, and also buying foods that have been rejected. Sorry, that's not what that one was going for, but eating foods that have been rejected or expired, or close to expiry. And organic farming is brought up as one example as well, at least in a local environment. Buffer zones are zones where we plant, for example, some other crop at the edge of farms. So that would increase biodiversity, and it would also decrease runoff and reduction of pesticides running off from the fields and being stopped by these buffer zones instead. So we can look, for example, what is organic farming then? It's basically not using GM crops and avoiding artificial fertilizers, so that would decrease the eutrophication, and pesticides, which harm local animals and herbs, and using instead organic fertilizers from the animals. So basically creating a cycle of nutrients and preventing pollution and loss of biodiversity. However, critics of this, of course, looks at organic farms producing most likely less food per area, so you would instead require more farm land and remove more natural lands to grow the food this way. So that's a slightly complex issue as far as I know. I don't know which the answer is yet. If you want to look at it holistically, what's the best point? Other possibilities as well includes agroforestry. That means that you have agriculture among trees. It could be either in a forest where or planting trees in your fields. So the idea is that this would reduce monoculture, where we just grow one specific crop, and you would have natural predators of your pests in the area that could, for example, reduce the use of pesticides. And you can't use heavy machinery as easily, so it would lead to less soil compaction. Also, you would have the roots and from the trees that would prevent erosion and improve water holding capacity, and also the litter that would fall from the trees would promote more natural cycling of nutrients that would increase the biodiversity of the soil by insects, by fungus, and so on. But other disadvantages of this practice includes competition between the crop and the tree, so which one is going to grow the most, and it's more difficult to harvest, so you might mismanage and lose some of the crop, and managing them could be more difficult. So this is something that people are promoting in some areas to reduce the impact of erosion, but there are critiques as well. Aquaponics is another way another kind of food production system that is promoted as well. It's basically, we do agriculture without using actual soil, and we combine this with aquaculture, having fish. So basically, we can harvest both from the plants and the fish here, and it creates this more or less closed system. So the nutrients that you put here would, the water that you put on this system would drain into the fish. The fish would eat part of this, and also the fish feces are recycled and used as nutrients for the crops. So basically it becomes a more or less a closed system. And what you lose is what you harvest, basically. So you need to add nutrients to kind of make up for what you lose. So we don't use soils, and we don't use the natural kind of oceans for this. So we don't destroy either soil nor water systems. However, we of course need to create this controlled environment. We need artificial lighting, so lighting, not lightning, and this would require higher energy. There's of course also hydroponics, which is a very related concept, where we grow plants in only water. Also creating closed systems where we have some evaporation loss, but we don't require soil, so we don't destroy natural systems. Once again, we need to control the environments, artificial lighting, high energy. But you might save a lot of space because you can grow these in vertical farms like this. And that's all I wanted to say about the last parts of 5.2. I hope you enjoyed this, and I'll see you later.